Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Ephraim Oshry was born in 1914 in Lithuania, where he studied at the feet of the most renowned Talmudic scholars of the 20th century in Lithuania. He was, Rabbi Oshry, one of the few great rabbinic authorities of note to survive the Shoah, to survive the Holocaust. During his time in the Kovno ghetto, by some quirk of fate, he was ordered, Rabbi Oshry, to serve as the custodian to a warehouse where the Germans stored Jewish books, rabbinic literature. They had a plan of a post-war exhibit of artifacts of the extinct Jewish race. Access to these sacred books gave Rabbi Oshry the ability to address some of the legal questions that came up in the ghetto. You see, even in the death camps, even in the ghettos, religious Jews strive to observe as many commandments as possible, as much of Jewish law as possible. And the experiences in these places of death gave birth to a literature of halachic legal questions and answers. Rabbi Oshry would scribble notes on a piece of paper, on a scrap. He would scribble the questions and the answers. Then he would, we've heard this story before, he would place them in tin cans and he would bury them in the ghetto. After Kovno is liberated, after the ghetto is cleared and he comes back, he retrieved those notes, and they serve as a record of his own thinking and the efforts of Jews to the extent that they could observe our traditions, and as I said, in a place of death, do their best to choose life. The name of the book is Shelot Utshuvot, Chuvos, he called it, Mimamikim, questions and answers from out of the depths. Questions like, could tea be used instead of wine? For the 4 questions on Pesach. Could the mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles be fulfilled by using an electric lamp? Was a Jew permitted to save his or her life by purchasing a certificate of baptism? And was it permissible to eat non-kosher food prepared by the Germans even when one was not yet in immediate danger of dying from starvation? And given the theme of this parsha and of Lauren's Devar Torah, and with your permission, Lauren, I'd like to focus on this for a few minutes. In 1942, in the Kovno ghetto, somehow the Jews were able to smuggle in a cow and slaughter it according to Jewish law. Don't get caught up in the details here. I have no idea how this was even remotely possible. But there was a rabbi, and the rabbi slaughtered the cow. Since salt was very expensive and very hard to come by and vital in koshering meat, in making meat kosher, the question came to Rabbi Oshry whether it would be possible for them to cook and eat the meat without salting it. And you can imagine how essential this meat was to them and their health after eating the miserable rations from the Germans. There was also the question of eating the actual meat Germans provided that had also not been drained of blood, transgressing the prohibition against eating blood. Oshry's answer is almost irrelevant. He essentially allowed to eat whatever meat they could get their hands on, and it's interesting the way he gets there. The most fascinating aspect of this story, of this chapter in Jewish history, is that they were even asking the question at all. Kashrut, the laws of keeping kosher, They have a hold on the Jewish people. Jews have always recognized the centrality of these laws. Our ancestors were prepared to sacrifice their lives rather than profane themselves by eating non-kosher food. We know that some of the most dramatic stories of Jewish martyrdom, Jews willing to put their lives on the line, risk their lives in the name of our tradition, involve choices around food. From the time of the Maccabees, when Jews were forced to eat pork by their oppressors, to the days of the Spanish Inquisition, when under penalty of death, there were crypto-Jews, secret Jews, who maintained their Jewish identities by observing the laws of Kashrut right up to the Shoah, right up to the Holocaust. Jews chose to die with their integrity. The idea of a Judaism without these laws is simply unimaginable. Now, what makes this extraordinary devotion to Kashrut even more fascinating is the fact that the Torah doesn't really provide a rationale for these laws. Yes, we know that animals who chew their cud and have a split hoof are kosher. Yes, we know that fish with fins and scales are kosher. But is there a logic to these distinctions? Is there a logic to why, for example, giraffes are kosher, but zebras are not? Or why salmon is kosher, but catfish is not? And birds are a whole other story. We just have lists of birds that you can eat and lists of birds that you can't eat. And if you were to ask me why this animal is kosher and that one is not kosher, my answer is, I have no idea. I can't even begin to, I can actually begin to explain, but they're just explanations. It's not made clear in the Torah. So Jews did what Jews historically always did. They tried to come up with the reasons for the commandments. So, for example, and Lauren mentioned this a little bit, in his Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides, the Rambam, insists that biblically forbidden food, well, they're obviously unhealthy, he wrote. In his words, and I quote, "I say then that to eat any of the various kinds of food that the law has forbidden us is blameworthy." And throughout history, others followed the lead of Maimonides, linking kashrut to health concerns. Now, there are at least 3 problems with this approach. First, non-Jews don't keep kosher, and they seem to be doing okay when it comes to health. Second, the laws of keeping kosher apply to Jews, if in fact it is about health, and God is the creator of all human beings. Wouldn't God be as concerned about the health of Jews and non-Jews alike? And third, whenever I hear this claim about kashrut being synonymous with health, I flash back to visiting my immigrant bubby in Wilmington, Delaware, and watching her pile schmaltz, chicken fat, right, into the food, the chopped liver, right, the tongue, right, all of the Ashkenazi delicacies that she brought with her from Lvov. There were many things happening around the kitchen table. There was a lot of love. But I'll tell you this, there wasn't a lot of healthy eating going on. So if it isn't about healthy eating, or it's really not about any of the historic reasons given for keeping kosher, what are these laws about? And the answer is that while the details, the particularities of why an animal must chew its cud or why a fish must have scales is hidden, the greater purpose of keeping kosher is revealed to us in the Parsha. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. Right? The word kadosh, kedusha. It's about holiness. Now, that's a word that we love to throw around. Holiness, kedusha. But what does it actually mean to be holy? And it's not enough to say, well, I'll know it when I see it. So my teacher, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, taught me years ago that the best way to understand holiness and what it means to live a holy life is to actually look at how the word is used in the Torah itself. In a couple of weeks, we'll read from the Torah portion of Kedoshim, the word kadosh, and we will read the verse, Kedoshim ti'yu, and you shall be holy. 15 verses after that verse, 15, by the way, not an insignificant Jewish number, a little trivia for you, fun party facts. We just had Passover Seder not too long ago. How many steps are there in the Passover Seder? 15, all right? How many levels of Dayenu? 15. What does 15 spell numerically in Hebrew letters? Yud He, Yah. It's God's name. By the way, there are 15 steps in the southern steps for those who were on the B'nai Mitzvah trip in December where we had the Bar and Bat Mitzvah. There are 15 steps leading up to the southern step, leading up to the gates of the temple. So this is a significant number here. There are 15 verses between Kedoshim to you, that you shall be holy, and one of the most important verses in the Torah, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Feinstein taught me, draw a line between these two verses, and you have everything you need to know about the arc of living a spiritual life and the meaning of kedusha, holiness. 15 verses separate the two commandments. Here are a few of the commandments in between. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not, verse 10, pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. You shall not cheat your neighbor. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. You got to pay your laborers that day. You shall not insult the deaf. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Now, you might have thought that holiness is some transcendent quality of sitting some isolated mountaintop and meditating to God. And yet, these verses have an everyday, ordinary, mundane quality to them. Pay the worker. Leave part of your field unharvested. Holiness is about vulnerability, opening ourselves up to others, bringing them into the circles of our lives, and when we do that, we are changed, we are softened, we are transformed, as is the world around us. Now, living with this kind of sacred attunement doesn't just happen. Like anything else, when we aspire for greatness, cultivating the soul takes time. It takes repetition. It takes discipline. Kashrut, the act of eating, perhaps one of the most repetitive, mundane things we do, becomes for Jews the primary vehicle we use to usher holiness into our daily lives. At each and every meal, we rededicate ourselves. We remind ourselves of the high standards of living as a Jew. We say blessings that express gratitude. We sit down when we eat. We speak words of Torah when we sit with others. We make conscious choices about which foods we eat and which foods we don't eat. And in the process, we remind ourselves of this network of Jewish values: loving our neighbor, caring for the orphan, the stranger, and the widow, affirming a connection to the Jewish people, and establishing God's presence in our lives and the lives of those around us. All of this gets deepened and reinforced by the regular practice of Kashrut. This is precisely why, when I work with conversion students, when emphasizing that becoming Jewish is about more than just accepting Jewish ideas. It's actually about integrating Jewish values into the rhythms of our daily lives. I always begin with Kashrut. I encourage them to take small steps, to begin to make choices, Jewish choices, about how you eat, what you eat, where you eat. I don't take an all or nothing approach to Jewish observance. I tell them, as I tell you this morning, that the minute you begin to make Jewish decisions about how you live your life, you are an observant Jew. And in those multiple moments throughout the day, when we eat, when we make Jewish decisions about what we eat, we remind ourselves of who we are, what we value, what we will do, and what we will not. Friends, we've always known that. That's why I believe our ancestors held tight and elevated, in a sense, the laws of keeping kosher. It doesn't matter where you are. A Maccabee living in the land of Israel in the 1st century BCE, a crypto Jew, a secret Jew living in Spain in the 15th century, a 20th century Jew living in the Kovno ghetto, or a 21st century Jew living right here on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Much has changed, and much has remained the same. We are Jews. We have a mission in the world to act a certain way, to live our lives with a sense of being called to holiness, to walk in God's ways, to treat our fellow human beings with a sense of respect and dignity, and to live like mention, to live like good, decent human beings. And like those who came before us, we will continue, God willing, to cultivate that sacred calling and grow our souls one act, one bite at a time. Shabbat Shalom.